The Fox News political insiders are here, and you can join our conversation. Like us on my Facebook page and on Twitter at Harris Faulkner, at FN Insiders, and you can hashtag Fox Report because we like it like that. John LeBoutelier, former Republican congressman for New York. Pat Cadell, former pollster for President Jimmy Carter and Fox News contributor. And Doug Schoen, former pollster for President Bill Clinton and a Fox News contributor as well. All right, I want to go to you first, John. We've got this news of these threats that have come form of this 9-minute video now. And you heard Peter Doocy reporting, and in so he said, Eric Holder, our Attorney General, said, we have to find extremists without stereotyping. You shook your head hard. Why?
Well, because stereotyping is the left's explanation for what used to be called racial profiling. Now, as far as I know, all these attacks in every country, are done by Muslims, not any longer just Muslim men. They're Muslim men and women. If you're the police, if you're the security forces, you are going to narrow down who you're looking at, mostly to Muslims. Sorry, but that's we're at war with
Which,
radical
by the way,
Islam.
Can look like anybody, as we saw with the Tsarnaev brothers. I mean, it's a profiling of lifestyle. It's a cultural profiling, probably more so than racial.
We had a tip on Tsarnaev. The Russians told us about him, and we ignored the tip. And look what happened.
Pat, what's your response to Senator Graham's comments?
Oh, I think he's right. I mean, I think the absence of the president today is a horrific signal to the world. I mean, symbols matter. Attention matters. The president didn't go. Not even the vice president, who often fills those roles, didn't go. It was a clear message of what they started from saying, leading from behind. At a moment when the United States is supposed to be central, but the policy of this administration, as I just said, leading from behind, is not to acknowledge this, not to acknowledge Islamic terrorism. They're having a conference. They refuse to do this. The president lives in his own bubble. And the result of it is there's no American leadership, and we're in disastrous shape, whether it's the war in the Middle East, Ukraine, and now the events in Europe.
Okay, so Doug, with all due respect for the people who did go and represent our country, Eric Holder is not even going to be in his job in a short while. I mean, he's the outgoing guy. Then you have Ambassador Jane Hartley, who was in the march. She did take part in the march. But we didn't have, and we had the DHS Deputy Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who was also at that summit, that meeting today. Yeah. But that arm-in-arm photo op that the world will see.
Let me be
not
clear.
The president of the United
and underscore
States.
What you're saying and what Pat and John have said. This is a moral abdication of our role as the leader of the free world. The fact that the president of the United States was not marching, the vice president wasn't marching, the secretary of state wasn't marching. This is just terrible, Harris.
Can I read this to you?
Please.
Security requirements for both President Obama and Vice President Biden are distracting during such events. Quote, this event is not about us.
It's about leadership.
That's from the White House.
It's the White House is just plain wrong. This is about every nation devoted to freedom, liberty, and universal values. The fact that we weren't there is an abdication of leadership, and it's not distracting. It's central to our role.
But, Doug, it fits a pattern of this president who does not like to project American power and to be the leader of the free world. But he's the first president ever who didn't like it.
Look, I think that, as I've said before, I think that you have a president who's not an American exceptionalist in his own words for the first time. You have a president who doesn't see that he is supposed to play, as we said this. He has a different view of the world about Muslims and Muslim terrorism. We all agree that it's not all Muslims, but when you cannot recognize who your enemy is, how do you think you mount a fight? And the problem now is it's now sticking out like a giant, huge sore thumb.
Okay. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is the vice chair of the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, says small networks of terrorists, just like what we saw roll out in Paris, are already here in the U.S.
I think there are sleeper cells not only in France, but certainly in other countries, and yes, even in our own. So I think this calls for vigilance.
The Fox News political insiders are back, and we want you to chime in Tune in at the same time. Facebook, if you will, on my page there. They'll put that information up there. Like us there. And then on Twitter, at Harris Faulkner, at FN Insiders. John LeBoutelier, Pat Cadell, and Doug Schoen are back. You know, it's really interesting. We started with that ISIS video. It's 9 minutes long. It's hitting now. A lot of people are blogging and talking about it all over social media right now. Our Catherine Herridge has been looking at that and giving us some details tonight. Among some of the things, you see our President Obama and several other leaders on there, and the call for attacking non-believers. Again, 9 minutes, ISIS. We've heard al-Qaeda in Yemen, having to do with the people who carried these out in Paris, and also al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So there are a whole bunch of people who hate us out there.
Yes.
You hear Dianne Feinstein. How concerned are you about how prepared we are or are not?
Well, I am very concerned about how prepared we are. I'm concerned here in New York that we have the full concentration of the New York City police and indeed around the country. But Harris, I think there's a larger point in what Senator Feinstein was saying. We need an offensive war against terror, not just defense, but an offensive war to root out ISIS, al-Qaeda.
So what does that look like?
That means using every resource at our disposal.
And you don't think we're doing that now?
No, I don't. I don't think we have done everything within our power to go after ISIS. I think we have to have more bombing raids. We need to have more men on the ground. We need to be in coalition and alliance with our allies, leading from the front, not behind.
Can I say something about what I noticed in the person that the White House chose to go represent our country? Eric Holder. Now, I know he's leaving his job as... All right. Well, whatever. He was representing us at the meeting that they had over there, but he didn't march. But here's my thing. Here's my question. He's law enforcement. We're talking about terrorists. Okay? I mean, can you tell me why we send the nation's top attorney and maybe, I don't know, like Jay Johnson ahead of the DHS or something?
Well, we had the
maybe he was busy, but you know what I mean.
Look, the Secretary of State, when he was running for president, argued that this was a law enforcement matter after 9/11. We've had this before. We have this administration allowing the Muslim Brotherhood's arm, CARE, to edit the FBI's what they're allowed to do in terms of doing mosques, or surveilling likely or sources or places where they gather enemies. We have in New York a mayor who just ended the most effective program that the police had in terms of monitoring, again, those potentially dangerous mosques and stuff. You start by having to recognize what you're facing. And like in Fort Hood, when you actually will say that Fort Hood was a workplace violence rather than an attack, an Islamic extremist attack, you got problems of being able to protect yourself.
Well, and yet the NSA can basically see the hairspray I'm using. I'm confused by that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad they can if it'll prevent an attack. I don't think your hairspray. I think, look, the big picture. What should America do? Doug started it off very well, Pat too. But I think we got to draw back and say, what is going on here? For 40 years, we fought the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Americans were together on that pretty much. We ended up winning, thank God, after 45 years. We are now in a new war, as the French premier said, against radical Islam.
But our president hasn't said that.
No, he won't say it, but beyond him, he should, of course he should. But beyond that, what should and could we do? And the number one thing, besides all the things that Doug said, is we need to start allying ourselves with something that is not popular over here.
What is that?
Strongmen. Mideast strongmen who run their countries and eliminate this stuff in their country. Number one, General al-Sisi, now President al-Sisi in Egypt, who has said he's going to wipe out the Muslim Brotherhood, that Obama gave the White House good housekeeping stamp of approval to. 5 years later, the elected president of Egypt is going to kill them. Thank God. In Jordan, King Abdullah wipes it all out. In Saudi Arabia, they don't wipe it out. They pay it off. They paid off Osama bin Laden. They pay off al-Qaeda for protection from it. We have to lead the way, and we have to get rid of all this soft nonsense, this politically correct stuff. In the Mideast, it's the Stone Age. And the only language these bastards understand is kill them before they kill us.
Pat, last word?
What do you think of that, Pat?
Well, that's pretty strong, John. Okay. That's one thing.
You don't disagree, do you, Pat?
No, not a bit. With either of you, I agree entirely. I think that we have to understand what we saw in Europe, and we need to look deeper at this. Europe is appeasing its way into this crisis. How they managed to let so many people in what are homogeneous societies, with so many immigrants with open borders basically for this, is astonishing. And the political class in Europe, starting with the EU and the leaders, are all saying, I mean, they're passing blasphemy laws. You can't do this. They're allowing Sharia law. They're allowing no-go zones. They have created a crisis that threatens their survival. And Europeans have gotten a wake-up call. We had that wake-up call, and we have had it again.
How frustrated are you with the president not being there in Paris today and kind of rolling out, knowing what we have to do to protect this country? Where do you think we
Harris,
are?
I am frustrated. I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. He is the leader of the free world. He should be there. And really, Harris, I can't think of any reason why we don't have our senior political and international leadership there. It is something that is repugnant to everything I believe is right. This isn't Democrats and Republicans. This is really our role in the world, our values, and an abdication of what I said before is moral leadership.
Unfortunately, the three of us are old enough to remember the funeral of President Kennedy. And a friend of our shows backstage then, he reminded the three of us before we went on about the first thing you saw in the front row of the same sort of march to Arlington Cemetery that day, President de Gaulle flew over here right away after the assassination, linked arms, right, Pat?
Yeah,
and was towering over everybody. Our president should have been in the middle of that front row going through Paris today.
That is resonating already, what you're saying on Twitter.
Very powerful.
That's very powerful. Very interesting.
Really what I just want to point out, too, about the appeasement problem, political correctness is directing everything. We have a problem, not with the whole Muslim world. The Muslim world has a problem, which the Egyptian president spoke to when I think is the most important speech any leader has given on this subject for a long time, when he said, we need a revolution in our religion. Remember, there's been no reformation in Muslim, unlike Christianity and Judaism.
Right. We'll get to some of our tweets and our Facebook posts, too, because I'm seeing a lot of people chime in, but they're mostly listening to what you just said, John. Very powerful about that former French leader coming here on the day of an assassination, recognition of an American president. I have a few words I want to say tonight, and I don't normally do this, but, you know, for nearly my entire adult life, I've been a journalist. I've seen a lot. Here's what I know. Democracy sits in the palm of the hand of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Now, there are those out there who would say that it's the other way around. But without freedom of nonviolent expression, it's just government with a whole lot of power and very limited vision. Because of our freedoms, we dream, we are dream makers, we are dream keepers. Our nation has fed, clothed, fought for, and loved more people than any other on the face of this planet. When America shines a light on evil, the light is so bright, our enemies, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, whatever they want to call themselves, would like to extinguish it for good. With what's happened to one of America's allies over the past several days, including the bloodshed at the newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris, radical Islamists are showing a true hatred for that light of free speech and press. And in the midst of those twin terror attacks across France on Friday, it seemed like something was renewed. The rush of a united globe that we really haven't seen since 9/11/2001. The savages did not put out that light. It shines even brighter now. Freedom of press, free speech will not be assassinated by a bloodthirsty enemy that radicalizes a faith to try to become relevant. It is their mission to silence the loudest criers for democracy on the planet, to behead our journalists and others. But that silence they seek will not come. It just can't. I promise you that.
Fantastic.
Way to go,
Way to go, Harris.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Pat, you have some thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I thought it was great what you said, because when you talked about freedom of expression journalism, you know, one thing is the worst thing that we do to defeat ourselves is not be brave enough, the courage for whether they're journalists, members of government leadership, to censor ourselves because we're afraid. And look, let's face it, the media in this country has done that regularly, and it done that when the Danish cartoons happened. We had a woman, an American woman, a cartoonist, Molly Nichols, who most of the audience doesn't know because only Fox has talked about it ever, who was threatened with a fatwa.
She's still in hiding.
And she's still. And she was. The FBI said it's serious. Go into hiding. Change your name. Have your own basically witness protection program. And you know what? They said we won't protect you. The FBI in this country won't protect you. We have to do this.
Can I make a personal point? You were, as Pat said, extremely eloquent.
Well, thank you.
And I normally wouldn't talk this way. I am Jewish. I am secular Jew, but proud of it. But given what happened at the market, given what happened in Belgium at the museum, the fact that the president didn't get on a plane and go to Paris Saturday to go to synagogue also ashamed and disappointed me.
I agree with you.
He should have been in synagogue worshiping with Jews to make it clear that never again continues to have resonance.
Wow.
And it's the same silence we have, whether it's Jews being killed and driven in the Midwest, or even
you know what
Christians.
we have here? We have bipartisan agreement on just how strong and great this country can be and should be. It's very interesting. By the way, I'm just seeing so much response, John, to your comments about that former French leader who came here.
Oh, yeah, President de Gaulle was a huge thing, because he was a very tall man, so he stood out over everybody else, and he had his officer's hat on, and it meant the world. And you know, we had this little blip during the Iraq War where America turned against France because France didn't go with us. But we would not be here today if the French hadn't joined the revolution against the British on our side. And there's something in the French, they're difficult, but they're also iconoclastic, idealistic, and the best of the French has come out this weekend. And unfortunately, the worst of our government has come out this weekend.
Can I make one other quick point about being protecting ourselves? We have, in Arab countries and Muslim countries, we have many of these blasphemy laws, even though they claim not. In the United States, our colleges and universities have speech codes which say you cannot say anything that might offend anyone. And you know what? The federal government finances the universities. If they said, you're not allowed to do that, free speech matters, even if it's stupid speech. But that's how we're training our country.
Right. Or they shout down.
Wrong.
Speakers go to colleges and they get shouted down and run out of the place.
Look at what's happened at Brandeis. I mean, it's terrible.
Interesting. I appreciate the history that you're bringing forth tonight. It's so important. It really is. We're going to toggle now to politics. Have you guys heard Mitt Romney is running again for president? I mean, it's a question mark, but I don't know if it's a question anymore.
No question. He's
Stay with us. We'll talk. You say he's running. Do you know something? Well, as we come back, we're going to talk about whether or not the third time is a charm for Mitt Romney, the two-time Republican presidential candidate, telling a group of high-level donors he's considering another run. Our political insiders are back. Gentlemen, John, I'm going to start with you.
Before we go to that, Harris, we thought that you usually read the tweets about us.
I do.
We're going to read two tweets about your very eloquent, wonderful statement. Jim Farrell eloquently said tonight, Harris, about our country and freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Thanks for speaking up.
Thank you, Jim.
Lurker said, Harris Faulkner, epic speech, Harris. And it goes on and on. They love you, but more than you, it's what you said. And it needs to be said.
You very much. I felt like no one else had said it from our country today.
You are speaking to the universality of our core values. It's what unites us as a people,
freedom,
and why the president should have been in France and why he needs to lead from the front, not behind.
All right.
Most of all, you're filling a vacuum there, which is in all of our politics, the lack of vision and leadership about what America is, and America's not afraid, and America stands for what America is.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm reading the tweets. I think we all agree upon the fact that we are all eyes and hearts with France, but we know what freedom is in this country. We are still that beacon of light. I want to move on real quickly, because there's some people who say they want to lead this country, and Mitt Romney is among them. John, do you know something that we don't know?
Well, no, I think he is going to run, and I think the reason he's going to run is what we just talked about. Since the last election, every day where this guy's ever gone, people come up to him on the street, in the airport, whatever, and they say, oh, God, we wish you had won that election. The country needs you.
He was right about Russia. Look at where we are there.
Right, but our deal is he's a terrible political candidate.
So does he take away, though, from, because, you know, it comes down to money.
Well, you said he was
I hear it's $1 billion now to get to the White House. What about Jeb Bush? What about Mike Huckabee?
He's the one said
I said that Romney would be the nominee. Now he is apparently getting back in the hunt. There will be sort of two primaries. One between Romney and Jeb Bush, both for money and votes, and a second one between Rand Paul, Ted Cruz and Mike Huckabee. And out of those two camps will come two front runners, and one of those two winners will be the Republican nominee. But Harris, we're divided. And what we need to do now is get together as a country, put the political division aside, and take on these large challenges, as you so eloquently said.
10 seconds.
The country was hungering for real leadership that represents the people. And by the way, that's what could upset all of these apple carts.
I'll be back with you tomorrow at noon Eastern for Outnumbered. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Open your Twitter feeds. They are on fire right now. Have a great week, everybody.